Some of you may remember that several years ago, I gave a rather stirring homily. And I used a peanut to make several points about the wisdom of God in nature. And after Mass, as I was greeting parishioners, as I would normally do outside of a pandemic, a visitor attending that Mass came up to introduce herself to me and said, "Very interesting, Father. I never expected to learn so much from a nut." It always amazes me to see what people remember about homilies. I'm sure that you have your stories too. Stories that made you think, ponder, pray, laugh, cry. Stories that filled your heart and your soul. It hardly seems possible that we have begun our Easter story. We have passed through a time of ashes and penitence. We have stood in the shadow of the cross, and now we gaze like those first disciples in the empty tomb. Startled, perhaps? Startled with wonder and awe and holy praise. For Christ is risen. That is our story. If anyone asks you, what's Easter all about? I hope you don't say chocolate eggs and ham or the Easter bunny. I hope you say it's about Christ risen from the dead. In our gospel story, all that Mary Magdalene, Peter, and John see is an empty tomb. Their reactions to the scene are different, though, aren't they? One is confused, another concerned, and the third believes. Today, this morning, is the feast of the faithful. And down through the ages, since the first Easter day, believers have gathered in the name of the one who set them free to celebrate that great day of rejoicing. All those centuries of believing, while strengthening the foundation on which our faith rests, have not brought us any closer to knowing. What allows one person to believe and another not to believe? Why did Peter, John, and Mary each respond differently to the same scenario, to the same scene? Why was the one whom Jesus loved able to believe while the others continued to stand in wonder? Why might a fourth person simply have walked away, certain that the centurion had stolen Jesus' body themselves? What does faith require? Faith requires that we have an open mind and an open heart to the miraculous. It asks us to respond with lilting, perhaps, rather than in adamant never. You know, in another place in Scripture, we are asked to respond with childlike innocence. People of faith are not closed to possibility, but they greet the unexpected with eyes open to the miraculous. Earlier before Mass, one of our own tripped and injured herself. And as she lay near the side entrance to the church here, People hovered around her. The miraculous takes place, checking on her, making sure she's okay. That's the miracle of God working in us as a faith community. But so often the opposite is true. We find ourselves looking for miracles in all the wrong places. You know, we sing in the memorial acclamation a phrase that has gone down for years. It rattles off our lips as if we created these words ourselves when we celebrate Mass. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. That is an invitation, my friends, to claim the faith that is ours, to recognize the face of Christ, yes, who is risen, but to experience the risen Christ in one another. In the second reading today, Paul reminds the community to keep their hearts set on greater things. For me, there are many fitting examples of groups keeping their heart set on greater things. A family striving to live Christian virtues and values during a pandemic when they're with one another 24/7. A classroom, whether in person or virtual, where the teacher not only teaches but role models values that reflect truth. A hospital that cares more for the patient than for profit. In fact, when we read or hear the stories of survivors from COVID-19 or from sexual abuse or even the Holocaust, their survival seems frequently to have been predicated on their ability to keep their hearts set on greater things. What does that mean for us, the believer? If Paul had addressed his letter directly to each one of us, gathered as community, or even personally, what would he mean when exhorting us to keep our hearts set on greater things? Where is your heart now? Thinking about the roast in the oven? Or the table that needs to be set? Or the onion you forgot to buy? The disciple whom Jesus loved was able to believe because he had his heart set on greater things. Those who work against incredible odds to bring about justice in a little corner of the world are able to do so because they have their hearts set on greater things. It's the Easter story. They look to Jesus because he's their comforter. He gives them peace. Imagine the good we could do together if we all heeded Paul's message today and began to set our hearts on greater things. That's the Easter story. My dear people, when our hearts are set on greater things, the Easter story comes to life. For the family struggling to pay its bills and put food on the table, Easter speaks of inner strength and courage that can never be taken away. For the senior citizen sitting so silently in the nursing home, Easter speaks of an intimacy and a love that lasts forever. For the adolescent struggling with empty relationships and peer pressures, Easter speaks of dignity, self-worth, and inner peace. For the spouse who has just lost his or her best friend. Easter speaks of a life with no more sadness, no more tears. When we say thank you more often to the essential and often anonymous workers who keep things going for us during this pandemic, restaurant cooks and cashiers, police officers and firefighters, store clerks, utility workers, postal workers, nurses and doctors, city employees. Easter speaks of eyes of love that don't miss a thing. And for the frightened, doubtful, discouraged, hesitant, fearful, lowly person in each of us, Easter proclaims, "Fear not. My peace I give to you." Yes, my dear people, Easter invites us to set our hearts on greater things. That's our story. Thank God that Christ is risen.